Okay, welcome to part 2 of your figurative language video. I apologize that there's 2 videos, but hopefully you use the break to go get a drink or a snack or walk around your block a little bit. Screencast-O-Matic only allows 15-minute videos, and this presentation in a face-to-face class is way longer than 15 minutes, and so obviously it's way longer here too. So let's pick up with simile. Simile is an indirect comparison. So if you remember, metaphor, right, was a direct comparison. So similes and metaphors are very similar. The example I used for metaphor was she's the wind when she runs, right? It's a direct comparison. She is the wind. Versus a simile, which is she's like the wind when she runs, or she runs like the wind. That's indirect. You're not saying she is the wind, which is a metaphor. You're using a simile. She's like it, okay? And that's an indirect comparison. And that's the easiest way to tell the difference between a simile or a metaphor because it uses like or as to make the comparison indirect. So let's look at an example from Lost in the Mall. Loftus does not dispute the fact that trauma happens, only that it can be severed completely from consciousness, stored unmarred in an anterior capsule like some sunken treasure chest, that one day opens to reveal its green mineral stones, its chunks of bright ore. Now, there are metaphors in this sentence too, but I've highlighted the simile. And you can see the simile because, again, it uses the word like, which we know sets up an indirect comparison. So here, she's comparing, let's see, you have to go back and find the terms of the comparison, right? So in other words, what is being stored like some sunken treasure chest, right? What's being stored like that? In this example, it's memory, right? And so that, again, that's because it here is a pronoun that means memory. Loftus does not dispute that trauma happens, only that it, which is trauma, which is memory, can be severed completely from consciousness, stored unmarred in an interior capsule. So even though it refers actually to trauma, we mean that like a traumatic memory, right? And so it's a traumatic memory, and the way it's stored in your brain like a sunken treasure chest. And so Loftus does not believe that your memory of a traumatic event is going to be like perfectly stored away like a sunken treasure chest, right? So when a treasure is on board a boat and the boat sinks, the treasure chest is stored perfectly in the bottom of the ocean until someone finds it. And so she's just saying, nope, that doesn't happen. It's not like your therapist or something can pull up that treasure and open it up and then there's all the treasure, or in this case, all the traumatic memories just spill out the way they were, right? Like that's not a thing, okay? And so here she's comparing the traumatic memory storage to a treasure chest. Okay, which is an odd comparison because you would think a traumatic memory is not a treasure. And so that's an odd thing to say, right? But then she does compare the memories here reveal its green mineral stones and its chunks of bright ore. That would be what would be in a treasure chest. So if it's a traumatic memory encoded in your brain, those memories of what happened are your green mineral stones in the chunks of bright ore. And again, these are pretty, right? Green mineral stones are pretty. Chunks of bright ore, pretty, because they're in a treasure chest. But if it's a traumatic memory, that's not pretty. And so again, the comparison's a little strange. So why would she set it up that way? I can't really say, because to me that's confusing. But I do think I understand the point, which is that memory, according to Loftus, is not stored perfectly preserved away like a shrunken treasure chest waiting to be opened, right? Okay, so simile, again, is indirect comparison using the word like or as, okay? So next, you have the last one we're going to cover, which is an allusion. Allusions are literary references. Most often, they're to popular texts. So you would be thinking mythology is really popular. In America, the dominant religion is Christianity. Therefore, there's a lot of biblical images or allusions in a lot of different texts. They'll refer to different Bible stories, but that's true of any religious text. If you go somewhere else where there's a different dominant religion in the culture, then you would have a lot of literary references to those religious texts. So it could be mythology like Greek myths or Native American myths or folk tales or fairy tales. those are all types of literary references, although you can have a reference to any piece of literature, any story, any short story. I've seen them to song lyrics, anything like that. It's for richness, and it's another layer of the comparison. They're beautiful when they're done. So here's one from Lost in the Mall. Loftus says no. What we access is half dream, half construct, entirely unreliable. Thus, with one swoop of her hand, this psychologist has driven a stake through Father Freud's heart. Now, I highlighted the allusion here, and here we're alluding to what? I said this is a literary reference to old mythology and folklore. What does Slater mean? To what is she referencing, and why would she use this to describe Loftus? So, it's interesting because she says with one swoop of her hand, this psychologist, and that's Loftus, right, has driven a stake through Father Freud's heart. Now, who needs a stake driven through their heart? Who gets stakes driven through their heart? Why does that happen, right? And so if you have a understanding of old mythology and folklore, then you would know that we drive stakes through the hearts of vampires, right? And that's how you kill a vampire, is you drive a stake through its heart. And so that's interesting because does that mean that she's then comparing Slater to a vampire hunter? And does that make Freud a vampire? That's very strange. And so here that's an allusion to that, as if Loftus is a vampire hunter and she's killed Freud. Interesting. Obviously, she doesn't like his theory, so it would make sense that she doesn't agree with Freud's view of the way memory is stored, right? Because she says, according to Loftus, she says what we access in our minds when we remember something is half dream, half construct. In other words, completely unreliable. So your memories, in other words, have been completely edited by time, by too many tellings of the story. That's the construct. And maybe you've dreamed them, so it's half dream, right? So Loftus doesn't rely on memories at all. Freud did, so maybe she is the vampire hunter that's putting this theory to rest, like a vampire and burying it, right? And so that is your literary reference. It's interesting, right? So why is Loftus being described that way? It's interesting. So remember that that was Slater's choice to use that comparison. Certainly an interesting one. Okay, so allusions are literary references. Okay, so let's talk about your assignment. Your assignment is called a Figurative Language Dive. That's the name of the assignment you'll see on D2L. So these are the ones you have to choose from: similes, metaphors, personification, hyperboles, allusions, idioms, onomatopoeia, and alliteration. Hopefully you were taking notes as we went through. The best way to take notes when you're getting lots of jargon like this is to have term, another column where you define it, and then an example. I always say 3-column notes are great for lots of vocabulary. So simile, what is a simile? A simile is an indirect comparison, and then your example is she's like the wind when she runs, right? And so term, definition, example. You might want to go back through now, or go back to that, like I think it was the second or third slide where I showed you all the different examples. I think it was organized like that: term, definition, example, because then you can use those cheat notes to help you go through the chapter, because you're going to find as many examples of figurative language as you can in Lost in the Mall. Type your examples in a document that you'll turn in the assignment folder, and remember it's called Figurative Language Dive. That's where you're going, and here's how I want you to do it. So be sure to explain. Give the example, right? It says read and type the example from the book and give the page number, right? So I want you to actually type it out for me. Name the type. Is your example a simile or a metaphor? Explain the terms of the comparison for similes, metaphors, personifications, and allusions. In other words, what's being compared to what? Remember, when we say she's like the wind when she runs, we would say a girl running is being compared to the wind blowing, right? And that's the terms of the comparison. Then explain why you think Slater used this type of figurative language in this spot and how it impacts your reading of the text. I did that with each example that I pulled out of the book, and so you'll just be doing that too. Why is Slater using this? Why is she describing Loftus this way? Why is she describing the other psychologist this way? Why is she describing the experiment like this? Why is she doing that, right? So See if you can explain why Slater is using it. And then again, I want to have 10 examples. You may repeat types. It's okay to have like 5 similes and 4 metaphors and a hyperbole, or 6 metaphors and 3 examples of alliteration and an example of onomatopoeia. I don't care what your combination is, as long as you have 10. You do not have to find an example of each one. Again, any number of any of them is fine as long as it adds up to 10. Okay, so here's an example. I pulled this right off the first sentence of the chapter. Memories are the footprints we leave in our lives. Without them, we look back and see just a blank stretch of snow. It's a metaphor. The term, Slater is comparing memories in our brain to footprints in the snow. When there are no footprints, we look back and see just a blank stretch of snow. So without memories, there is nothing, we are nothing, right? So those are the terms. What's being compared to what? So you can see I typed out the quote. I told you what type of figurative language it was. I explained the terms, what's being compared to what, and now I'm going to talk about why she uses it. I think Slater uses this metaphor here because it's the first sentence of the chapter. Right away, she wants us to see how people are made up of their memories, that their memories make them who they are. It gets disturbing then to learn in the chapter that we can't rely on them. Looking into your memories and seeing just a blank stretch of snow would be terrifying. That would be nothing. Slater wants us to feel that. It's like feel how scary it would be to look back on your life and see nothing, right? That you have no memories of people, things, places, anything, right? And so how scary. You would be nothing. You would just be this heart-beating being, right? And so I think she wants us to understand that memories make us who we are, but our memories are wrong. And so interesting way to start the chapter, right? So again, example, type, terms, explanation. Okay, so find 10 examples, include all 4 parts, the passage with the page number, the type of figurative language, the terms of the comparison, and why Slater used it. Submit your assignment when you're done to the assignment folder. It's called Figurative Language Dive Assignment. And that's it. Congratulations, you're done.